بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Continuing in our series, elevating our sisters, lessons from the greatest women in Islam. Today, inshallah, we're going to look at a story, an incident from one of the women of the past. And inshallah, going forward in this series, we will try our best to focus on narrations and stories and benefits from various women in Islam. As we covered already many of the great women, today, inshallah, we will focus on a snippet or a glance at the life of Sarah, the wife of Ibrahim. May Allah have mercy upon her, and may peace and blessings be upon both of them. And the reason why I'm focusing on her is due to an incident or story that happened in her life that both the brothers and sisters can benefit from, and they can resonate in our life. And inshallah, we'll try our best in the next lessons to try to pick various stories and narrations which can highlight benefits so that we can complete more benefit besides the biographies, full biographies of every great woman. Otherwise, if time permitted, we will do biographies of every great woman and that we could come across. But that obviously requires a lot of time and effort, and perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will benefit us by this. So today we're focusing on the wife of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Sarah. Now Sarah, she's the wife of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and she comes in the narrations or in the texts of this religion, both the Quran and the Sunnah. Her name, the ulama, they usually mention that her name is Sarah bint Haran. And this is what I could find. Most of the scholars of the past, whether they be Imam al-Tabari, Ibn Athir, Ibn Qutaybah, Ibn Kathir, and others, rahimahumullah, they would mention that. Sarah bint Haran. And they mention her name, and what it seems to be, wallahu a'lam, is a lot of her story, or parts of her story, is also reported in the Torah, in the Old Testament. And so we can find that some of the biographical details of Sarah are found in the Torah, and that's why some of the ulama, they have included some of those narrations and points into the story, into her story and life. The ulama, they usually mention some benefits in pertaining to her. So first we began with her name, Sarah bint Haran. And secondly then is her relationship to Ibrahim alayhi salam. Who is she in relation to Ibrahim alayhi salam? Now, the ulama, they mention, as a background, we should know, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he lived in a time period where his father and his people were upon shirk. And so when they thrusted and threw Ibrahim alayhi salam into the fire, as Allah tells in the Quran, the fire then became cold and he escaped this. فَآمَنَ لَهُ لُوطٌ فَآمَنَ لَهُ لُوطٌ. Allah says in the Quran that after this incident occurred, Lut alayhi salam believed in Ibrahim. Lut alayhi salam believed in Lut alayhi salam believed in Ibrahim. This is mentioned in the Quran, I believe, Surah Al-Ankabut. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, he lived in the time period of Lut. And this is found in the Quran when you read the different stories. But this incident shows that Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was upon the Tawheed and the Risal and the Nabuwah, that later on he was followed by Lut alayhi salam, who believed in him, and also Allah made him a prophet. So Allah says in Surah Al-Ankabut, Surah 29, ayah number 26, فآمن له لوط وقال إني مهاجر إلى ربي إنه هو الغفور إنه هو العزيز الحكيم. So Allah says in the Quran that after what happened with the fire, Ibrahim being thrown into the fire and then coming out, so Lut believed in him, Ibrahim's message of Tawheed. And Ibrahim said, I will migrate for the sake of my Lord. Verily he is Almighty, the All-Wise. So 29-26. So from here, some of the mu'arrikheen or mu'arrikhun, the historians of the Islamic world, they mentioned that Ibrahim was related to Lut and Sarah was related to Ibrahim. In reality, this point is actually taken from the Torah. It's taken from the Torah, and it's something which the ulama, the muhaqqiqun, those who verify Islamic knowledge, like Imam Hafid ibn Kathir in his Qasas al-Anbiya or Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, he disputed this point. Because they say Lut and Sarah were related, and so Ibrahim married Sarah, and she was his niece. Ibn Kathir says in the stories of the prophets, the people of the book say that Haran, he had Lut and Sarah. And then, so they didn't mention that. He continues and says, Ibn Kathir, all these are strange speculations, because he left his country with the company of Sarah, etc., and she was not his niece, as some of the Jewish rabbis said. So this is the claim that they claimed. Ibn Kathir says, or mashhur, it's been narrated, reported, well-known traditions or commonly widespread, أن سارة ابنة عمه Haran, that she was the daughter of his uncle Haran. So Haran had 2 children, and Ibrahim married his niece. However, Ibn Kathir, after he mentioned this point, he says these are reports mentioned by the Yahud, the rabbis of the Yahud, and even if we were to assume that this practice of marrying the nieces, which is not allowed in Islam, it's not allowed in Islam, he said even if we were to assume this, it was acceptable in their time, it was not for the prophets to do that. So it's a side benefit. You can find this in the English translation of the stories of the prophets, page 161, or Sahih Qasas al-Anbiya, compiled by Sheikh Salim Hilali, page 118. So Sarah is his wife, Ibrahim's wife, but in terms of her being his niece, then this is something that mentioned in the Torah, and it's not correct. It's not correct. The ulama, they mentioned that there's much that's said about Sarah's life after she's married Ibrahim, but before that there are some narrations that he traveled with her and he met her and how he met her, and all of these narrations, Wallahu a'lam how authentic they are, so we'll move to that which is authentic and that which is reliable. What about her description? Some of the scholars, they mention that what we do know is that she was a very beautiful woman, and this is something testified in the ahadith, but we'll mention here that Al-Aini, he says in Umdat al-Qari, وَكَانَتْ سَارَةٌ مِنْ أَجْمَلِ النِّسَاءِ, that Sarah was from the most beautiful women, and it was said that she did not disobey Ibrahim alayhi salam ever in anything. For those reasons, then he also honored her, and he had much respect for her. And this was mentioned by others as well, some of the ulama of Sir, of the history, that she was known for her beauty. And that is testified by the hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, which is going to be the bulk of our lesson today, about what happened to Sarah in the company of the Jabbar, of the wicked tyrant. But in the narration, Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu reports in Sahih Muslim Hadith 2371. 2371. As well as in Sahih al-Bukhari, Hadith number 3358. It mentions that she, Sarah, وَكَانَتْ أَحْسَنَ النِّسَاءِ, that she was from the best and most beautiful of the women. So this point is testified about her character or her background. What I want to focus on today is this narration and the benefits that we can derive from it, because it is a great benefit for both the brothers and the sisters in how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He protects those who fear Him, and those who have sincerity towards Him, and those who turn towards Him. Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu reported, and the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لم يكذب إبراهيم النبي عليه السلام قط إلا ثلاث كذبات ثنتين في ذات الله. He said that Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Prophet of Allah, never lied except for in 3 instances or in 3 cases. 2 of them were in relation to the right of Allah. When Ibrahim said, وَقَوْلُهُ إِنِّي سَقِيمٌ, in Surah Safat, Allah tells us that Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was invited by his people to come and to enjoy a night out with them, and he knows that they do shirk and haram things, he made the excuse, Inni saqim, very, I'm feeling unwell, I'm feeling sick, as an alibi in order not to go. And from there we know that Ibrahim then destroyed the idols when in their absence. And this is mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Anbiya, and Surah Safat, and others. So the first thing he told him, Inni saqim, I'm sick. So they left him alone. And so this is the first of the lies which the Rasul said Ibrahim, he mentions that he did. And what we're going to explain later, the ulama, they mention a debate, were these lies or these were not lies? In the truest sense, was this lying, or was this some type of illusions? Because Ibrahim alayhi salam, the meaning of what he said has more than one interpretation. You could have more than one interpretation. So this is the first one. The second one, which is in the same story, that he said, بَلْ فَعَلَهُ كَبِيرُهُمْ هَذَا, and this is in Surah Anbiya. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, he told his people when he destroyed the idols, and they asked who did it, he said the biggest of them did it, and he instructed them to ask, and of course they knew all too well that it doesn't have any capacity, subhanallah, to understand. So this part of the story as well shows Ibrahim alayhi salam, he said the biggest of them destroyed it, even though he did this in order to teach them a lesson. And then he says, the hadith says, Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Wahidatan fi sha'ni Sarah," and the last of the lies was in relation to Sarah. So this is our focus on this part of the story. As for the other focus, like we said, Ibrahim, some of the ulama, they said that in reality, it wasn't a lie, but rather he used words which carried more than one meaning. And this is permissible in Islam in order for them to benefit, to think, and to give them the benefit. So he didn't outright lie. And this is some of the scholars they mention. And some they say that he did this, and this is the only case in which this happened. And of course we find that ulama, they have that mentioned. So for example, they say that when it comes to the issue of when he said inni saqim, that I'm feeling unwell or sick, he meant that I'm sick of your shirk. Sick of your shirk. Not that he meant that he literally sick, and they understood that he was physically sick. So there is this interpretation as well, and the ulama they mentioned, but that's not our point today. Our point today is in relation to the story of the story about Sarah, what happened. So what happened then was, as the hadith continues, that فإنه قدم أرض الجبار ومعه سارة وكانت أحسن النساء فقال لها إن هذا الجبار إن يعلم أنك امرأتي يغلبني عليك. Ibrahim alayhi salam, he traveled Sarah, and Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he traveled her, she wasn't the most beautiful of the women. So he said to her, if these people know that you are my wife, they will take you away from me. So if they ask you about who you are in relation to me, tell them that you are my sister, because أنك أختي فإنك أختي في الإسلام. Tell them you are my sister, for verily you are my sister in Islam. And so this is what Ibrahim alayhi salam, he told her to say. And it comes in a narration that the reason why he was telling her all of this is that when Ibrahim alayhi salam entered Egypt, أتى على جبار من الجبابرة, he entered upon the presence of a tyrant from the tyrants who ruled Egypt. Now before we continue, it's important to mention that the ulama, they say, or not the ulama, but those who investigate the story, they find that this is also mentioned in the Old Testament. You find this story and in the Old Testament in Genesis, chapter 12, verses 11 to 13. And what you notice is that the story is quite similar there. It's quite similar. And they call Pharaoh, Abraham, and Pharaoh's harem. And they mention something similar to this, that Ibrahim a.s. after what happened with the fire and Lut a.s. believing him, he went to Egypt. And so a similar story is mentioned there. So this is just a side benefit. Nonetheless, this tyrant who Ibrahim entered upon, some of the ulama, they try to explain this tyrant. He would take any woman from the women who he saw to be beautiful. And so this is why Ibrahim a.s., understanding the situation that he's in a situation where this man, this tyrant, will take any of the women. And Sarah was very good looking. He became worried. So he told her at this point that if anything he asks you, to tell him this. And so the reason why he's saying that she's a sister, this is important, is it because we know إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ, the believers are really brothers and sisters. And like we said before, these are ma'arid. These are types of illusionary speech which carry more than one meaning. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, he's not intending to lie, or he's not lying. He's intending by it, when he says, you're my sister, he means that sister in Islam. And so, of course, Ibrahim alayhi salam understands that the man, the ruler, or this tyrant, he will understand something different from that. And hopefully, due to his status, he will leave him alone. And this is, again, show Ibrahim alayhi salam's awareness of what is happening. His awareness of what is happening. The narration then continues, and it says that when Ibrahim entered, or he went, he continued, Ibrahim explaining, فَإِنِّي لَا أَعْلَمُ فِي الْأَرْضِ مُسْلِمًا غَيْرِي وَغَيْرَكِ فَلَمَّا دَخَلَ أَرْضُهُ رَآهَا. So the narration then continues, that Ibrahim alayhi salam, he continued. And when he continued, he told her, listen, there is no other believer that I know of who was a Muslim except for me and you. It's important now. This point we have to explain it. He said, I don't know of anyone who is a believer, who is a Muslim in this land besides me and you. The ulama, they have discussed what did Ibrahim mean by that statement. Because we just said earlier that Lut alayhi salam believed. فَآمَنَ لَهُ Lut. Lut alayhi salam believed in him. So how did Ibrahim say that? So the ulama, they mention the reality, like Ibn Kathir, he says in his tafsir, explaining this issue, that really what Ibrahim intended, أَنُّ لَيْسَ عَلَى وَجْهِ الْأَرْضِ, there's nobody in the face of the earth who is a couple, who is a believing man and wife, right? Husband and wife, غَيْرِي وَغَيْرَكِ, besides me and you. This is what he meant. There's no believing husband and wife except for us. For Lut alayhi salam believed, but Lut was in another land. Right? So this is what he intended. Otherwise, it doesn't mean that there's nobody else believing besides them, because he's not meaning that the only Muslim on the face of the earth is just us. That's not what he intended. And so this is a benefit in case somebody read this and said, subhanAllah, what was Ibrahim saying there? Right? Was he denying somebody else was a Muslim? And that's not the case. طيب. Continuing the narration, then Rasul sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, so when Ibrahim alayhi salam came to the ruler, رآها بعض أهل الجبار, some of the tyrants, what's it called, workers or his associates, they saw her, and they requested that she come to the king or the ruler. And there comes to you, he said, and they told the king that there comes to your land a woman whom you alone deserve to possess. Subhanallah. So they're encouraging him to take this woman. And so here, what happened then was, the king or the ruler, he requested that Sarah come forward. Only her, and without Ibrahim. And so Ibrahim went to the side and he went into prayer. And he was making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her from this tyrant, because this tyrant is zalim. As a side benefit, some of the scholars, they mention that the reason why Ibrahim alayhi salam, in the first place, he said that she was my sister, is that he hoped for one of two things. That if he said that she is my wife, then he might have just killed Ibrahim and taken her. So he said sister, so if he respected him, he will respect her. Also, Hafid ibn Hajar says in Fath al-Bari that he mentioned it, the reason, because it was from the practice of this king that he says, where does he say? Yes, he says it's from the practice of that king that he wouldn't take the daughters of another man, and so he hoped by that he will leave her alone. Otherwise, if he knew he was the wife, he would take her. And so in reality, Ibrahim alayhi salam, understanding this, he hoped that it would get him away, but it didn't work. So Ibrahim alayhi salam stood on the side outside, praying, making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect his wife. And more importantly, the ulama, they mentioned that Allah showed Ibrahim alayhi salam what was happening to Sarah. Means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed Ibrahim the manifestation was happening behind what he could not see. Means what was happening privately between them, he was able to see in front of him. And so now, with this event happening, Ibrahim alayhi salam, the hadith continues and says that when the Sarah entered upon this tyrant, he stretched his hand out towards her. Means he tried to touch her, and of course he is haram for her. So بسط يده إليها فقبضت يده قبضة شديدة. So as soon as he stretched his hand out to touch her, his hand froze. It became tied up and he couldn't move it. So he said to her, ادعي الله أن يطلق يدي ولا أضرك. I supplicate to Allah, please, to release my hand, and I promise I will not harm you. Subhanallah. Look what happened here. Because she fears Allah, because she's a believer, believing woman, because of her deen, and all of these great qualities, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected her. So then, she made dua, فَفَعَلَتْ, and then he was released from that hold. And then he tried it again, and it happened again. And he asked her to supplicate again, and she repeated the process. And then again, he tried a third time, and it happened again. And she supplicated for him, and it released. He was released. And then realizing this, that this woman is protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from any harm coming to her, he said to her and to the person who brought her to him, his servant, he said, إِنَّمَا أَتَيْتَنِي بِشَيْطَانٍ وَلَمْ تَأْتِنِي بِإِنسَانٍ. He said, you only brought to me a shaitan. This woman, the devil. You didn't bring me a human being. Get her out of here. And out of honor for her, وَأَعْطِهَا هَاجَرَةً, he gave her Hajar, which we know became the slave girl of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So he gave Sarah Hajar, and Hajar gave Sarah to Ibrahim. And from later on we know Ibrahim, Hajar gave birth to Ismail, and later Allah allowed Sarah to give birth to Ishaq. What's benefit, the hadith continues, that when she was released from that area and gathering, means in the company of the king, and she came back with Hajar, she told Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he saw her, and he said, how have you returned? What has happened? And she said, with all safety. He said, how have you returned? فَقَالَتْ مَهْيَمْ, means the safety. And she said, قالت خيرا. She said, he asked, how have you returned? She said, I returned in good. كَفَّ اللَّهُ يَدَ الْفَاجِرِ وَأَخْتَمَ خَادِمًا. Allah has held back the hand of the wicked doer, and He has given me a khadim. So this is the end of the narration, and Ibrahim alayhi salam and Sarah then, they continued their journey. In this narration, there are many benefits, many benefits. As Hafiz ibn Hajar and Imam al-Nawawi rahimahumullah, both, they mention many fawaid in this qissa. And the point that we were trying to emphasize really is the point that Ibrahim alayhi salam, when Sarah was taken away from him, he was making dua for her. That's the relationship that he had with her. But more importantly, her dua was answered as well. Her dua was answered as well. Means she was righteous. And she had herself fadl. And this was Ibn Hajar, after he explained many different takes on the story, in terms of what happened, and the benefits. For example, he mentions, when Ibrahim alayhi salam was mentioned by some of the ulama, that Ibrahim, when he was praying, Allah showed him what was happening to Sarah through a qalura safiya, like a bottle, a clear bottle. Ibrahim was looking through this bottle, and he could see the events that was happening. He could see the events that were happening. And so some ulama mentioned this, that's a benefit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala showed this miracle to Ibrahim. He also mentions, amongst other benefits, is that in the hadith we learn mashru'iyyat akhuwat Islam, that the legislation of brotherhood and sisterhood in Islam. Ibrahim called Sarah his sister, and this is why today we use this term, sister. Right? Someone so and so is your sister in Islam. So and so is your brother in Islam. Here's a dalil wadih for that, clear evidence. And amongst those benefits, and this is the point we want to see, is ijabat dua wa ikhlasun niyyah, the answering of the dua and of having sincere intention. Because when Sarah made dua to Allah to protect her, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answered dua. And here Imam Ibn Hajar, he mentions, and he mentions it on the others have mentioned as well, that Sarah is amongst the greatest women in the past. She's amongst the greatest. And this is something little known amongst the brothers and sisters. So Sarah has a station. And he actually says, this is mentioned by more than one scholar, even though it's not a correct opinion, but they mention this, that some have went so far to say that Sarah was a prophetess, And we know this is not correct, as we mentioned already about Musa, and we mentioned this already about Maryam. But some have said this is proof that, in reality, she has fadl, even though she's not from that, she's not a prophet or prophetess, but she has station anyway. She's one of the best of the women. And that's because she has this fadl. She made dua, Allah protected her. And she had sincerity. It comes also in a book called وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, which is about stories and narrations about the people of the past. It mentions from the Fadail of this hadith منزلة Sarah, the status of Sarah, زوج إبراهيم عليه السلام, من الإيمان وإخلاصها في الدعاء وتقديرها للموقف الذي هي فيه. It shows her iman and her sincerity in the dua, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and her status, high status in position in relation to Ibrahim himself. And this is a great benefit for the sisters specifically, in that a woman, she fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah will protect her from those who wish to do evil, because the Jabbar was trying to harm her integrity and honor. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. And whoever fears Allah, Allah will get them a way out. How many times today do we think about dua and dhikr and ikhlas and deen as ways to protect ourselves from harm? Every believer should be in a position to think that the real protection is in the hands of Allah. Yes, we take the precautions and measures. Stay from bad places, stay from places where things are dangerous or unclear. All these precautions were taught. But number one thing to protect yourself, and always keep the consciousness in front of your mind, for the brothers and the sisters, is Allah is the best to protect us. Wallahu khayru hafidha. Allah is the best to preservers and protectors. Also, we see that if somebody is in a position like this, then they should supplicate to Allah. This is the most important thing. Supplication to Allah. Sometimes we find that the supplication to Allah might be underemphasized. And in fact, it might not even be told to people. Dua. Because we hear dua so much as if dua is something you just do. And this is a dangerous position. And if you don't make dua, you rely just upon the physical means, then you cannot guarantee success. This is something so important. So many Muslims today, we find ourselves forgetting the power of the dua. Dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers. Especially when you're in the position of need, in a position of weakness and danger. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of the Quran, in the Quran, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the dua of the one who's in distress. And I mentioned this point because we need to look in today's world, where so much emphasis is placed on the physical and the material means. We forget the most important things in life is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our deen, our religiosity. Without those, we have nothing. And Allah reminds us in the Quran, أَمَّنْ يُجِيبُ الْمُضْطَرَّ إِذَا دَعَاهُ وَيَكْشِفُ السُّوءَ وَيَجْعَلُكُمْ خُلَفَاءَ الْأَرْضِ. Is it not He, Allah, who responds to the distressed one when He calls to Him, and who removes the evil, and He makes you inheritors of the earth? Surah An-Naml, Ayah 62. And when in positions of danger and worry, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who defends the believer from any harm. Always we have to remember this. Whatever we do is secondary. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُدَافِعُ عَنِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. Allah defends those who believe. Surah Hajj, Ayah 38. So this is a great story to remind us the power of dua, especially for the sister, and the position of Sarah, who seems sometimes to be forgotten. I mean, many of us, we have sisters are named after this great woman. Now we know some of her great status. Of course, there's more to her story than that one incident. However, that story is a powerful story to show her status, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects those who believe, and how not only did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect her from an evildoer who tried to harm her and her honor, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted her the gift by way of her, which came Hajar. And of course, it benefited both Ibrahim and Hajar, especially in today's time, when we know that in these societies we live in, the safety of women is not something that can be taken for granted. A'yadhu billah, we live in a world today where even these lands here, these Western lands, women are not safe. And so precautions should always be taken for the sisters to protect themselves, to be away from places of danger. But what is the number one protection? The number one protection, which is not emphasized in the media and in our posters and in our various sessions of workshops or whatever they do talk about safety and public safety. Protection is in the hand of Allah. Dua wa ad'iyah, being sincere, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected. Because look at the situation that she was in. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested her in front of a jabbar, who is dangerous, tyrant, and Allah protected her. And today we live in a world today where we are not, these things are not even put into the equation. So we have to always connect the dots in Islam. Take the precautionary means, stay away from the places where there is harm and danger, like in dua. So important. And I want to finish today's lesson with another side of it, another benefit of a dua, especially when it comes to rizq. And it comes to dua, because sometimes we find that dua is something, we talk about it, but we don't really believe sometimes in it the way that it should be believed. And I want to mention the point, which is in relation to the power of dua, even when it comes to our provisions. You see, sometimes people in times of need, they need to turn to Allah. Not sometimes, but they should always be doing this. But we find ourselves at times where we're very in need. And this is the best time to make dua. Because when you make dua and you're in need of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will always be there for you. I want to finish by mentioning another qissa, another story, that is not related to this one, but still, it is a benefit in relation to dua. Because today's lesson is about dua. It's about dua and the power of dua. And that women and men should be making dua, and especially in situations when we are in need. We need to train ourselves to be this way. It comes in the narration of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, a story between a husband and a wife. And a story that teaches us that the rizq Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides, and that those who make dua and sincere, Allah will give them. Again, going back to the ayah, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ, and He will provide for you where you do not see. Abu Hurairah reports Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, دَخَلَ رَجُلٌ عَلَى أَهْلِهِ. One day a man entered upon his wife, فَلَمَّا رَأَى بِهِمْ مِنَ الْحَاجَةِ. That when he entered upon his wife, he needed something, some food, some provision. So he went outside, and then he came and he found again his wife. And he asked, obviously, something to eat, something to fulfill his need. He's hungry, he needs food. And she didn't have anything, but she said she will prepare something. So she went to the stove, and she prepared as if she's going to cook something. In reality, she didn't have anything. This is a powerful story, because this is the power of dua. In times like these, when your times are out, down and out, dua. This is when you make dua, when you're down and out. This is the power of dua. So while in that situation, she made dua. And she said, Allahumma razaqna, oh Allah, provide for us. Oh Allah, provide for us. So what happened then was, she went to the stove. She then saw that the pot which she cooks with was full. So what did she do? When her husband left, she made dua, Allahumma razuqna, oh Allah, provide for us. And then she went to her pot where she cooks with, and she looked inside there, and she found that it was full. It was full of food. Then وَذَهَبَتْ إِلَى التَّنُّورِ. Then she went to the stove where she bakes, and she found it full. And then فَرَجَعَ الزَّوْجِ. The husband came back home, And then he said to her, have you found any more food? Were you able to manage to get anything? And she said, Na'am, yes. Min Rabbina, my Lord. And then she went and she provided the food. And she provided that which she found on the stove and her pot. From the provisions Allah provided for her. So Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Amma innahu law lam yarfa'ha lam tazal taduru ila yawm al-qiyamah." That when she provided for him, she removed the pot from the stove, or the pot from the stove, and she provided the food to her husband. Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if she didn't lift it out from where it was, it would continue to be provided until Yawm al-Qiyamah. The power of dua, subhanallah. And here, this story, Shaykh Albani says that the hadith is Hasan in his checking of Takhrij, Mishkat Masabih. And it's an interesting story because, again, related to the issue of dua. That we look at dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He provides, He aids us, especially in those times of need. So the first story of Sarah, time of danger, physical danger, and Allah provided for her. And in here, this woman, and this story of a husband and wife, when they're physically hungry. And likewise, Imam Wadi'i authenticated the hadith. And so when we look at this as a miracle, we see it to be something more realistic, which is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of those who take care of His deen. Those who are taking care of His deen, who fear Allah and who are pious, Allah will take care of them. And so these two stories I wish to share with the sisters and the brothers to encourage us to connect and continue to connect and to increase our iman and to have husn dhan billah, good thoughts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we live in a time where people, they put themselves, or they think that the physical needs, physical material means are all that there is left. That's all they rely upon. They don't rely upon the matters which are more important, which is the isti'adad, the preparation of iman. And when we look at these two stories, Sarah, this great woman, may Allah have mercy and blessing to be upon her. In a time of physical danger, Allah protected her. For her dua, wa ikhlasiha, her sincerity and her iman. On the flip side, a husband and wife, they don't have any food to eat. And some of us maybe think, subhanallah, is this practical to make dua like this? This is the deen, we're talking about deen. Yes, there's asbab. From fi'lul asbab is dua ila Allah. The most important of the asbab, take dua ila Allah. But you see, the story is not telling us to forego all the other means. What it's telling us, this is a powerful means, especially in those situations where we are down and out, or we feel that we are in a weakness. So ever more need, ever more reason to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when we do this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take care of us. It's an encouragement that when you increase in your religion, contrary to what many people have in their mind, many people what they have in their mind, contrary to this, is that when you are more religious, Allah, He makes your affairs easy for you. Many people today think that when you become more religious, affairs get difficult. Yes, there is difficulty. You'll be tested. But there are some people who think that if you become more religious, everything's going to fall apart. You're going to have a tough time in life, so just stay away. And what is it? What are these narrations showing us? You fear Allah more, Allah makes your affairs easier. وَالدَّلِيلُ ذَلِكَ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِهِ يُسْرًا. Whoever fears Allah, Allah makes the affairs easy for him or her. Wallahi, this is what we should be focusing on today in a time, like we said, there's this growing secularization in the world. There's a growing dissidence between people's deen and the reality which they live. And the focus shouldn't be that we should move away from our deen. Inshallah. And of course, there are more benefits taken from these stories. But I want to focus on these two incidences to highlight the position of Sarah, because this many of us are not familiar with it, and her dua and the protection and her status Allah gave her due to this. And secondly, the story about the husband and wife, because the power of dua and the religion and deen, and that we need to always go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah, we benefited by this kind of benefits. Inshallah, if any questions come, or if there are any questions, inshallah, we'll take them. The questioner says, is it correct to say that another lesson is that these two stories emphasize how important it is to have a righteous wife? Absolutely. A righteous wife, there is nothing compared to it. And as Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, وَخَيْرُ مَتَاعِ الدُّنْيَا مَرَةُ صَالِحَةً. The best position anyone could have, i.e., from things that somebody could have in their life, is a righteous wife. And so we can see now when Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in other hadith to marry the women who will help you, تعين وأيد you في الدنيا والآخرة. Now we see literally a practical application of the hadith. A woman who will help you literally. Rasul said a man should marry a wife who will aid him in his dunya and his akhirah, or dunya or deen wa dunya, his deen and his dunya. So here Sarah, she benefited Ibrahim in his dunya because by way of her came Hajar and his children, and also deen. She aided him, she's upon the same deen, she's with him, she's right, she's look at all this. Same with the other wife, making dua, providing rizq. And this is the idea. Sometimes we forget, we think rizq is only from this limited mindset that we think only the rizq can come by way of, primarily by way of work only. Yes, there's work. And then we look at the story of Maryam, connect the dots. When Maryam alayhi salam, a woman, and Zakaria came in, he saw her with all the fruits. What did he say to her? He said, Maryam, anna laki hadha. Where did you get this from? قالت هو من عند الله. This is from Allah. Subhanallah. The same thing that this woman, when her husband asked her, did you get anything? أصبتم بعد شيء? أصبتم بعد شيء? Have you got any food after now I came back? قال امرأته, his wife says, نعم من ربنا, from my Lord. So of course this is a great benefit as well, that a righteous wife is innumerable, invaluable. Question says, do we know the names of the husband and wife in the second story? Wallahu a'lam about the names. Just it starts with very general terms, something maybe perhaps it could be investigated. So inshallah we could check to see if anyone commented on that. We do know that some of the ulama, Ibn Kathir, he mentioned this story as well in his tafsir. He mentioned this qissa in his tafsir. Under the tafsir, فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا, in his tafsir of Surah Talaq, سَيَجْعَلَ اللَّهُ بَعْدَ عُسْرٍ يُسْرًا. SubhanAllah. He mentioned under the ayah, when Allah talks about Surah Talaq, about divorce, that Allah will make it after difficulty, will give them ease. And he mentioned this qissa and others like it. The names, wallahu a'lam, I don't see it here, even in the Sharh Mishkat, the commentary and others, it doesn't mention. Maybe we could look more if there is any mention of that. Anyone has any questions? As the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and Hajar, and Sarah, and the story of the tyrant, it's mentioned in Bukhari and Muslim, fi Sahihain. Bukhari, it's hadith number 3358. It can be found on sunnah.com, 3358. And for Muslim, hadith number 2371. Any other questions? If there's no more questions, inshallah next week we will continue similar to this style, which will mention narrations and stories from here and there in order to increase the benefit, because there's so much more we could mention about the biographies of the great women and men. But since we want to derive benefits we can all benefit and take into our lives, inshallah we'll try our best to do it this way. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to benefit from that which we heard and to increase in His obedience. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Subhanaka wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.